All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. This is a rather long presentation, and at some points it might feel repetitive, but I think it will be good to go through a lot of the common invasive plants that we have on Martha's Vineyard, especially because they can be similar in the times that they decide to leaf out in the spring and when they flower and go to fruit, but it's important to know these slight differences because it can make a big difference in management. So like I said before, this is invasive plants and how to manage them with me, Robyn Graygor, the biodiversity technician. We can just get started. So just as an introduction, what I do at BiodiversityWorks is I work with the Natural Neighbors Program, which is a a program where we visit people's properties and help them find ways to implement natural features into their yards, and just property in general to best support native biodiversity. A sub-project of that is the Invasive Plant Brigade, which is a time exchange model of volunteers where I coordinate them and we just help each other on different properties to remove invasive plants. So that's where I'm coming from, and partially why I'll be focusing on mechanical removal. With that being said, this webinar will focus on mechanical removal techniques for common terrestrial invasive plants. So we're not getting into any chemical or biological controls, and we're not going to explore aquatic plants. Um, and a lot of the species I'll be discussing will need continuous management. So it's not one foolproof control that you'll be able to do. Similar to, let's say, a lawn that you are perpetually managing, you will need to be committed and persistent to managing invasive plants as well. So I think looking at it through the view of lawn care, this is something that many people do and can continue to do in a way that benefits native biodiversity. So why manual removal? It sounds hard and it sounds like it takes a lot of work. Well, it can be time consuming, but we choose to practice manual control because you can minimize adverse effects to non-target species or just non-target elements of an ecosystem when you go in carefully with loppers, pruners, or shovels. No heavy equipment, so you're not adding any additional soil compaction. And you can really just target what you're looking to remove without doing a ton of damage. Well, you can still do damage, but doing less damage than some other management techniques. So chemical control can be labor efficient, and it can be very effective in the short term. So you may see great effects initially, but there's a history of resistance building against chemical controls, as we all know. Um, and also, there's some serious concerns about environmental health. And being on an island of Martha's Vineyard, we are in a closed system. We're surrounded by water and very sensitive habitats that are globally rare. So I don't I don't feel comfortable suggesting that we use chemical treatments to manage invasive plants when there's manual control that just about anyone can do, and it's very accessible and it's effective if you do it right. So let's start by setting some expectations before I jump into specific plants and how to manage them. Like I said, manual control is not something that's going to give you instant gratification. You have to look at it through the lens of long-term management for it to actually be effective. Doing one removal session once a year is not likely to produce any meaningful results, and it could actually amplify an infestation, especially if you're doing removals while a plant is in seed, or if you're unnecessarily disturbing soil, that can add a risk of further germination and a spread of an infestation. And in the invasive plant brigade, I encounter a few people, a lot of people, even myself sometimes, that are overwhelmed by just the scope of infestations, how we're working on this little plot, but you look across the street and there's a whole forest filled with this plant we're trying to remove. And you might not be able to eradicate an entire infestation, but that's okay. Perfection goes against progress. We want to do what we can, and there are ways to do your part without having the weight of eradicating bittersweet on your shoulders. So str strategizing to make the most out of your labor is the best way to go, and I'll get into that shortly, so that you're not wasting time or energy. And this is a great way for me to plug the Invasive Plant Brigade, which not only strategizes your labor, because I'm leading it and I have this background in invasive plant management, so I'm able to help make decisions and plan how you're going to remove invasive plants. But it also gives you a few extra hands, which makes the world of difference. So jumping right into the most common invasive plants encountered at these invasive plant brigade removal sessions. It's no surprise to anyone, I think, that bittersweet is the #1 most encountered invasive plant at our removal sessions. It's at 26%, and that's just if we've actually removed it. So plants that we've removed at removal sessions, and I am it's safe to say that it's on most properties somewhere or another. Wineberry is also very common, followed by autumn olive, which is very prevalent on the island, especially in our meadows and other grassland habitats. Multiflora rose as well, and bush honeysuckles. So to give a little taste about what this presentation is going to be like, I'm going to go through these top 5 invasive plants, give you a little background on their identification and when they leaf out in the spring, when they go to flower, and when they set seed. And with all of that in mind, I will make recommendations on when is the best time to actually remove them and what do you do to remove them. So starting with roundleaf bittersweet, formerly known as Asiatic bittersweet. This is a woody vine. We've all seen it before climbing trees. It can climb up to 60 feet and cause serious damage by strangling and girdling a tree. So, especially in the winter, we'll see a lot of damage when we have big storms like we had this winter, and it brings trees down more easily when they're under stress from a vine crushing in on them. So like the name suggests, they have round leaves, they're alternate, and they have fine serrations, which you can kind of see in that picture there. There will be little white flowers that appear in the spring around May and June, and just before that, in April and May, you'll start to see the plant leafing out again. So that's new growth and as well as new seedlings popping up. August is expected for it to set seed, which most people recognize the oriental bittersweet or roundleaf bittersweet berries. They start out as this yellow-green color, and as they ripen, they turn red and the yellow cracks open like a little pod around it. So the way that I would suggest approaching oriental bittersweet, especially with a manual removal techniques in mind, is pulling seedlings when possible. Sometimes something will look like a seedling, but it will actually be just new growth from an established vine already that has a big root system that's hard to dig out. So for those larger vines, you can cut them low and frequently. So do multiple cuttings throughout the growing season when leaf out begins until seed set, because once seeds is set or the berries ripen, you risk spreading an infestation, because when you're ripping down a vine and cutting it out of the ground, berries can get shaken off. Next is wineberry. So wineberry even in the winter, you can see it from a mile away. It has these downy red hairs along the stems, buds, and under the leaves, which show up in the forest like fire. You just see this red from a distance, which also is a great way to tell it apart from our native raspberries, which don't have these downy hairs. So wineberry will start to leaf out. You'll start to notice this is a reoccurring thing early in the spring, April, May, followed by flowering in May until early summer. And they'll produce these little white flowers, and then everyone's favorite, the berries, which will usually develop in late summer, so July, August. Wineberry is, although it's a very common plant on the island, it's one of the easier invasives to manage. They don't have a very complex root system, and they can pull from the ground rather easily, especially if the soil is moist or loose from even I had a property where there was just a lot of worm activity that was you were able to pull them out of the ground easier. But yeah, and it's you could start managing it earlier in the season, but it's the most effective to start managing it right as leaf out begins because the plant is transferring energy from the roots into new growth for the growing season. So you're actually getting it at a vulnerable time when pulling actually is most effective. Next, we have autumn olive, which, unlike wineberry, does not have a shallow root system. So this deciduous shrub, it can reach up to 20 feet tall, so it can get big, and I've seen some really big autumn olives with some huge root systems. They have these very distinct leaves that have silvery flecks on the underside, on their fruits, and on the stem, especially present on new growth. The branches will sometimes have long thorns, but I like to recognize the silvery sheen that is like unmistakable, especially in the Northeast here. There, there will be these berries that appear in midsummer, July, August, and they're prolific berry producers. So you will see more berries than you've ever seen on these shrubs in the late summer that get picked off by birds and other animals and spread around. But they're not as nutritionally valuable as our native berries that grow on shrubs around here, like bayberry or even our native raspberries, cedars. So there's a lot of berries, but it's kind of like fast food. It's a lot of food, but it's not great quality. So what we like to do with the Invasive Plant Brigade and what is generally thought of as one of the best management practices is to pull seedlings when you can, which will be a very common theme among shrubs. Pull when you can, but you can't always, especially if the root systems are too complex. And then you can cut down shrubs 3 to 6 times a year and before seed set. So the main goal really is avoiding this prolific amount of berries. And then once you've cut them down several times, you can wrap the stumps in black plastic to avoid regrowth. They'll probably still resprout and you'll have to go in and clip away any resprouts, but it helps to block photosynthesis and block the plant's ability to resprout. But it's not foolproof, like most invasive plant management strategies. Multiflora rows, it's a similar approach. Pull seedlings when you can, start early in the spring, and cut shrubs low 3 to 6 times a year. 3 to 6 times is kind of a golden number because not only are you able to revisit and cut the shrub down, but it just stops. It's a good marker so that you don't lose track of what you've done so far and can come back and make sure that there isn't much regrowth, which it sounds like a lot and it can be, so that's why it's 3 to 6, a range. You don't have to do 6 times a year. Uh, for those of you who are familiar with multiflora rose, it is not very pleasant. It's a very thorny perennial shrub. It has these big arching stems that can make it look so much bigger than it actually is once you actually get to the root of it. So if you're going to remove it, you want to cut away the stems first so that you can get to the stump or the root system if you intend to dig it out. Um, Unlike our native roses, they have this. I'll try to circle it with my pointer here at the bottom. These fringe stipules, which are a great identifying feature, and they create these lovely fragrant flowers in the spring, that then develop into hips in the summer, and they'll last through winter and just like autumn olive get picked off throughout the season. Bush honeysuckles, another very common invasive shrub on the island. There's a few different species that we have here. Most commonly, I encounter Moreau's honeysuckle. Um, they all grow to be quite tall, 17 feet, and they have hollow stems. So in some of these identification paragraphs here, I've tried to highlight things that will make it easier to recognize a species because sometimes, especially if you're not used to plant ID, it can be hard to know what you're looking at. They have opposite leaves and the iconic honeysuckle tubular flowers that appear in the spring and create nice little clusters of white and yellow. Um, But although they're nice and smell very fragrant, honeysuckle is a big problem and it can outcompete native species and cause problems in forest understories and meadows, especially in edge habitats. You'll see it a lot of times on the side of roads or where your lawn ends. So like most shrubs, you want to pull the seedlings, cut shrubs low, and repeat throughout the season. So this can be from March until fall. Generally, for most plants, throughout the growing season is a good time to manage them and just make sure that you are working to avoid seed set. So now we can move into more broader categories. We have a lot of plants to get through, so I won't go into as much detail as I've been going into for those top five, because unfortunately there's a lot of invasive plants all over the place. But it's good to recognize them and know how to treat them if you do happen to encounter them. Burning bush. Some people might be a little emotionally attached to their burning bush because it creates lovely red flowers in the fall, or lovely red foliage in the fall that is a statement piece for many people's hedgerows or even just a statement shrub to have in your garden. But rest assured, there are native alternatives like highbush blueberry, which also gets lovely red foliage in the fall. Um, Burning bush, it's a deciduous shrub. It has those corky wings along the stems, which are a great identifying feature. They have opposite branches and they have, of course, their brilliant oval leaves. And they'll produce berries as well in the fall. So like most of the other things we've talked about, they leaf out early March, April, followed by flowering in April through June, and you can manage them throughout the growing season. Just be sure to keep an eye out for when they go to seed, which is usually around September. We pull seedlings when we can, dig out when possible, cut back in the fall, wrap with black plastic like was shown before with the autumn olive, and clip any regrowth. And revisit next season. You always want to make sure that your management techniques are working, so always check back. Glossy buckthorn is a great example of needing to check back because no matter what you do, it's pretty much guaranteed to resprout vigorously in an attempt to save itself. This is another large shrub. It can grow up to 20 feet, 25 feet tall. It has these shiny leaves, as the name suggests, and produces yellow flowers that appear in the spring, and they'll get these big clusters of dark black berries in the fall or late summer fall. We haven't actually had to work with glossy buckthorn before in the invasive plant brigade, but I suspect that we will. So I've done some research into what's the best way to handle it. And pull seedlings, shocker, and weed wrench, which is a type of tool. It's a leverage tool where you can hook the base around a stump and use your body weight to pop out the root wad, which is not easy, but it definitely helps. You can also girdle larger shrubs, which is as shown in that picture there. You cut a around 6-inch border around the entire trunk, around chest height, and you take a pry bar or something that you can peel up a bark in a ring, and you make a ring around the whole bark to disrupt the uh, phloem. So basically, the goal is the tree doesn't have access anymore to all the sugars that have been collected through photosynthesis. So the phloem sends the sugars back down to the root system. So you're cutting that off, but you're leaving the xylem in place, which sends water that the roots collect up to the top. So you're starving the root system and leaving the tree, or shrub in this case, standing, which can be used as valuable habitat and also minimize disturbance, which is always great. You can also cut them back and wrap the stumps with black plastic. You can see in this chart that I've put down, I have those 5 suggested cut times under the management section, which basically is just start early, make sure you've cut anything back so that there won't be fruit production by July, and then you can continue cutting into the fall and wrap with black plastic after that. Norway maple. All right, we're getting into some trees. I believe it's just 2 trees that I've noted here. Norway maple it's just a huge problem, and it's not very, like, it doesn't cooperate with management very well. So you have to get a little bit creative. So this is a deciduous tree. It looks a lot like sugar maples. And on the island, we have red maples, Acer rubrum, which are native. Um, and there's some defining characteristics that can help you identify Norway maple against other maples, which is they have these big broad leaves with 5 to 7 lobes. They'll also come out really early in the growing season, one of the first trees to leaf out in April and May. And if you snap off a leaf throughout the growing season and you squeeze it, you're likely to see a white latexy sap come out, which doesn't happen with our native maple, red maple, or with sugar maple. The bark is more shallow than some of our other maples, which can be typically more shaggy or have deeper groves. And the buds, so over here on the left, have a reddish color and they're blunt and rounded, which is different than our our native maples, which typically have a different shape and color. Flowers are green and upright, and seed wings are horizontal, so they're like this, whereas sugar maple is more curved in, like a V. You want to pull seedlings, which is no surprise to anyone at this point. Cut back saplings and smother the plot for 1 to 2 years. So smothering you can do with a tarp or with cardboard covered in mulch, and you just cover it to make sure that no light can get to the forest floor, which obviously blocks other plants from growing as well. Um, and you can also debark, which is kind of a pseudo girdling technique because Norway maple sprouts vigorously if you cut it or if you girdle it. But debarking is a little bit different. You're starting all the way to the base as low as you can get with like a carpenter's draw knife, and you slice these big pieces of the bark off, and that has shown to have some success. I've never attempted it, but um, that seems to be the newest work in progress. So not guaranteed to work, of course, like any of these removal techniques if you just do it once, but something to try and follow up on and monitor. Obviously, you'll still have to remove some sprouts that come back. You can also remove all branches, so top the tree, which has also shown to produce less sprouts than girdling or just chopping it down. And of course, tree of heaven, the spotted lanternflies, best friend, everyone's favorite. Tree of heaven, it's a relatively new arrival. It's a deciduous tree, can grow up to 50 feet tall. It has these big compound leaves, and if you snap off a branch, it smells like rotting peanut butter, which is not very pleasant. You can pull seedlings. You can debark in the spring or summer, similar to the Norway maple, and regularly clip off any new growth. But you want to make sure that you're protected because it has sap that will irritate your skin rather seriously. So it's not something you want to go into without having preparation. It's just not safe. And then you could leave the tree standing. Of course, you would have to revisit, and it, tree of heaven is very finicky, so it can be difficult to keep it to keep to make for it to actually fully work. Leaf out will be early in the spring and then followed by flowers in May and June. Seed set will with these winged seeds that are wind blown will happen in late summer around August. And yeah, just when you're going to work with it, be mindful of the sap, which can be flowing more so in the growing season, or in the early spring. Um, but it's also one of the best times to actually approach Tree of Heaven and manage it is the early spring because it's most vulnerable because it's sending that energy up to the canopy rather than storing it in the roots. All right, now we can move on to forbs and grasses, which there's a lot, so I'm gonna try to cut it down more. Bamboo we see all over the island. You don't really have to worry about flowering or setting seed because it spreads through rhizomes. It will start sending up new growth between February and April, and you can manage it pretty much anytime throughout the growing season. You can cut new culms or new canes that are coming up low to the ground and mow or just cut repeatedly. And you can dig out the rhizomes after you've repeatedly managed with cutting and mowing. But it can be difficult and it can cause a lot of soil disturbance. So you want to make sure that you've exhausted the plant enough to the point where it won't just immediately grow back from rhizomes left behind. There's also rhizome barriers that you can install, which, work best if you install them before you plant bamboo. But if you want to try to stop rapid expansion, it's something you could look into. And then you can smother the area with a tarp and mulch or some other impervious surface to make sure that you've killed anything left behind. Bush clover. Bush clover is another huge problem on the island. It's found in meadows and grasslands. Um, when it first grows, it has these more tender sprouts, but as it matures, it gets more woody and fibrous. And it has these flowers that look pea-like, like from the pea family. And that's something that you can look out for in the late summer to early fall when it's in bloom. Management is, it can be tricky. There's a lot of different things that people have tried, but from what I've read, the most effective way is to wait just until buds form and mow or cut the plant So you're not disturbing the soil and you're just cutting that plant right as it's at one of its most vulnerable stages, spending a lot of energy trying to send out new flowers. Silvergrass, the recently declared prohibited plant of Massachusetts, otherwise known as Miscanthus sinensis. This is a perennial bunch grass that is in almost everyone's yards. It seems like it's become a new statement piece. It can grow big, it can grow up to 10 feet, and it won't always maintain that erect look. Sometimes it will start flopping over, and that's when people start to see, oh, maybe Miscanthus isn't that great. One way to identify it is it has this silver white midrib stripe going right up the middle of the leaflet, um, which stands out pretty vividly when you're out in the field looking at it. One way you can manage it is pull small infestations. So with the invasive plant brigade, we've manually dug it out with pitchforks so you're not slicing the root system. Instead, you're kind of prying it out. You can then mow it short, or just cut it back, which is something that a lot of people do anyways, but cutting it back throughout the growing season is the most important time to cut it back instead of just in the winter when you don't like how it looks. Seed set will occur in August, around the same time that the plant is sending up these flowery heads. Garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is in the mustard family, unsurprisingly. It is a biennial herb, so in the first year it sends up a basal rosette, which is seen up there in the right corner, which is just low to the ground, and in the second year it sends up a flowering stalk, which can be 2 to 3 feet tall. It'll stay green all winter long, but it will start growing new growth in February through April. So something to keep an eye out for right now. You can pull in early spring. Now is a great time because they go to seed at the end of May between May and June. And it's something that it's relatively easy to hand pull. I've done a lot of hand pulling of garlic mustard. And just get that out of the way now while you can. If you can't visually recognize it from these pictures here, your nose will know. So take a leaf, crush it, and smell it. It smells just like garlic. You can actually make pesto with it. So uh, you don't always have to rely on your eyes. There's a few plants like that in this presentation. Goutweed, also known as bishop's goutweed. This is a ground cover, a perennial ground cover that a lot of people have and have planted, especially this cultivated version where it's variegated with that white blotching. So it's a ground cover, so it grows just 1 to 2 feet tall, but it sends up a flowering stalk with flowers typical of the carrot family. So something like Queen Anne's lace, it has a similar flower to that. Um, so you might mistake it for Queen Anne's lace at first, but when you look down to the leaves, they have these compound leaves that are subdivided into threes. And um, the when it produces seeds, they're small and they're brown. So what you can do is pull early in the spring, like everything that we've talked about so far. You can cut down right at leaf out and repeat throughout the growing season. So repeated cuttings, because pulling can cause problems because they have rhizomes and goutweed is notoriously aggressive, so it will come back, especially if you're adding additional soil disturbance. So cutting relieves the stress of having soil disturbance, and then you can smother it with a tarp and wood chips. And smothering, it depends. Some people say you can smother for a few months, other people say that you can smother up to 2 years. I would say if you want to be safe, you want to at least smother for an entire growing season. And knotweed. Knotweed, everyone thinks you have to use chemicals to get rid of knotweed, but I believe there is another way. So this is an herbaceous densely growing perennial that looks shrub-like but isn't a shrub. It has hollow stems. It looks like bamboo, kind of when you snap it at the node. And the leaves are large and alternate, kind of heart-shaped. They'll start to leaf out just about now. You'll start to see these little sprouts coming up right at the base of these big dried stalks, which means it's a great time to start managing them. What you can do is cut them back 3 times a growing season, and you want to bag all cuttings, since knotweed can regrow from little fragments. Um, if if you're cutting it, if they're larger, you can leave them on site and just pile them and let them dry out. But it's just worth knowing the risk of resprouting so that you can be careful moving forward. And if you do this 3 to 4 times a year regularly, so that you're starving the root system, and then go back the following growing season and do the same, over time you will start to see the population shrinking. It can be tedious, but it has pretty recognizable results. Stillgrass is another plant that has given me so much grief, especially on this island. It's an annual grass, so it actually dies back each fall and then germinates in the spring. Um, it can grow up to 3 feet tall, and it has this silver stripe that goes down the middle of each leaflet, which is a great identifying feature. It will start to leaf out around now in between March and April, and it will flower and set seed around August to September. So a great time to manage it is just as flowering begins, similar to some other herbaceous plants that we'll discuss. Stillgrass, if you get it right as it's pushing energy into flowering, it's at a very vulnerable state. So you're able to kind of cut it back and really exhaust that root system when it matters most. And then smother with a tarp or other impervious surface. Oh, mugwort. Everyone hates mugwort. There's no one that likes it, I think. But mugwort is, I will say, another one of those plants that if you can't recognize it with your eyes, your nose will know. If you crush a leaf, it has a very fragrant smell that resembles sage. The leaves are not consistent. They'll have completely different shaped leaves when they're first sprouting versus when they have a tall flowering stalk. So using your nose, I always use my nose when I'm identifying mugwort. What you can do is you can cut it back 2 to 3 times a year before it sets seed and then smother with a tarp, which it's not always a foolproof solution. Sometimes you'll smother and you'll see mugwort poking out from around the tarp. But that's just why you have to revisit your removal site and make sure you're doing any upkeep. So something like that happened, cut those down and add another tarp. And there's ways you can adapt to make things work, but it doesn't work every time without fail, but it has worked for some people, which is all we really need in the world of invasive plant management. Spotted knapweed. This is a common plant on the vineyard as well. I've seen a lot of people iNaturalisting it, probably because of that flashy purple pink flower. It's an herbaceous biennial, so similar to garlic mustard. In the first year, it forms this basal rosette, and in the second year, it bolts up a big flowering stalk with a purple thistle-like flower. And fun fact is the reason it's called spotted knapweed is because those bracts right there, the specialized leaves right under holding the flower up, that little cup, they have a little dark tip at each point, which I guess can be considered a spot. So it's was named spotted knapweed. This plant will start to leaf out as early as April, so keep an eye out for it. And soon after, it will flower right at the end of May until late fall, October, sometimes even into November. You want to pull plants while they're bolting. So in that second year stage when it's starting to push up a flowering stalk. Like I've said a few times before, it's at its most vulnerable in that state. And um, if you just have the best chance of it not growing back. Not 100% chance, but the best chance. Then you can smother the area with black plastic and mulch, tarp, any impervious surface really. Black plastic can be helpful because it solarizes the ground and adds a lot of excess heat from the sun, which, can help with management. And we're on to our last group of plants. We're almost done. We've almost made it through, which is vines. The bane of my existence. The vines, just like bittersweet that we covered at first, can cause a lot of problems for the ecosystem and for me when I'm removing them. So, wisteria. Everyone loves wisteria because of the clusters of purple, flowy flowers. It's a deciduous, woody vine. It twines up trees up to 60 feet tall, so you'll see it growing draped throughout the canopy. You'll also see it growing in a lot of gardens. The stems are short, they're gray and brown, and they have fine hairs on them. The leaves are compound, so they have alternate leaves in their compound with 6 to 10 leaflets. Oh, sorry, 6 to 10 inches long and with 9 to 11 leaflets with waved margins. So for a while, I was getting wisteria and trumpet vine confused. Trumpet vine has serrations, whereas wisteria doesn't. Uh, it has relatively smooth edges that are somewhat waved. So wisteria will start to leaf out in April and will continue until June. So flowering will appear around the same time. You might even see flowers before leaves come out. If you look at that picture there, you'll see the flowers and you'll see the little leaves that are just starting to burst out. And seed fruit production will happen shortly thereafter, right in May. So you want to pull small vines when you can, cut mature vines at the base every 2 to 3 weeks, from spring until fall. So just repeated cuttings over and over again can exhaust that root system. English ivy, this is an evergreen vine, so it stays green throughout the winter, but really starts to elevate growth early in the spring. So you can still follow these same rules that I've hopefully been instilling in you, that you start early and you continue throughout the season. They have these white veined leaves, and when they're growing low to the ground, when they're a younger plant, they can have these deep lobes, but when they get to the flowering stage and they're more mature, uh, they actually lose their lobes and they kind of turn into this more tear-shaped leaf. You can cut from the base of a tree up to the shoulder if you have a uh, tree that's being coated in English ivy, which I've seen a few times. And that will, just cut it off from its root system and let the upper part die on its own. But you can also smother on the ground, especially if you are dealing with a tree that's been infested. You want to not only cut a ring from the English ivy so that it can't access its roots, but you also want to clear it from the ground around. And that goes the same with if you have it creeping through your lawn. You can hand pull it, or you can even smother it, although smothering comes with its pros and cons. If you don't want everything under the smothering area to be smothered, you have a bit of a predicament there. But hand pulling can work, and you can also dig them up if you need to. Japanese honeysuckle. So this is a semi-evergreen vine, so it will hold its leaves partially through the season, maybe not all of them, but it will maintain some sort of green coloration. So it was one of the first things I started noticing when I went outside after the snow melted was that its leaves were perking up again. So this is a woody vine that can climb over 80 feet tall. It'll have fine hairs and it has simple leaves that are look similar to the bush honeysuckle leaves. And it will have, of course, the showy, fragrant tubular flowers that create that lovely honeysuckle scent. Um, So you can pull vines from the spring to the summer. You can also cut them at least twice a year. You want to, of course, avoid that seed set in September. So start early and work up until seed set, and then you can continue after, making sure no extra seed gets put into the ecosystem. We're almost done. I know it's kind of a droning on thing of going through all of these, but I just wanted to put out this resource so that if you ever needed to know everything about each invasive species, you could. Porcelainberry, it's another woody twining vine. It can grow up to 20 feet tall. Um, it can be problematic as well. It's not easy to deal with. The root system can get huge, and yeah, like most vines, it's not on your side, so you have to get creative. The leaves are arranged alternately. It's sometimes called false grape because it looks pretty similar to our native fox grapes. Some leaves have deeply low uh, lobes, and while others will have more flattened leaves that looks more similar to fox grape. They'll have also these coarsely toothed margins, and when you flip them over, they'll have a shiny underside rather than the opaque white underside that our native grapes have. It also has a white pith or core, so if you take a snippet and look in the middle, that middle core will have, it will be white, whereas our native grapes will be a brownish color instead. Porcelainberry will start to leaf out early from April to May, followed by flowering in June. Seed set will occur in September. Those indigo, very pretty berries. And you can pull what you can, as always, early in the spring and cut the root crown and any regrowth. So you can actually take a horizontal cut of the root crown if you're able to dig it up. And you can't rip out that whole root crown usually. You can just cut a slice off the top and monitor and come back. That's worked for some people, especially if you actually rub dirt in it. It can create fungal growth that can clog water conducting tissue and lead to plant death over time. Swallowworts. This is our very last plant on the big list of invasive plants and their management techniques. So you've almost made it through. So there's two swallowworts. They're both perennial vines. They grow up to 9 feet long, and they have these simple tear-shaped oval leaves with smooth edges. They'll get these star-shaped flowers that are kind of fleshy in the early summer, and that will be followed by slender seed pods that release these wind-blown seeds similar to milkweed, although this is not milkweed, and if a monarch lands on it and mistakes it for milkweed and lays its eggs, the caterpillars they won't be viable because this plant is not their host plant. What you can do is you can mow or cut this plant repeatedly in the early spring and summer, and then smother with, of course, a tarp or other impervious surface. And we've made it to our resources section. Um, As I've said, the Invasive Plant Brigade is a great resource to help remove invasive plants. I can help identify things and figure out where priority removal sites should be. And we have a lot of extra hands that can come and actually help you do the work. Here's our newly released logo. Um, Featuring two hands clasping to represent community and, of course, bittersweet growing out and trying to strangle the eye in invasive. And down here in these circles, I have best management practices. So a lot of the information that I gathered from this slideshow was through the Lower Hudson Plant Working Group, best manual management practices. So you can use that QR code to get to that. It's a great booklet with a lot of information that I couldn't put all in this presentation because, as you can tell, it's already had a lot of information. But if you want even more, go check it out. Disposal. We didn't have time to cover disposal in this talk, but I do have a flyer that you can access using that QR code, and it basically, there's different forms of disposal, but the goal is to dispose of your invasive plant material in a way where it can't just regrow and form another infestation. So you can bag it, you can just of it as garbage, you can dry it out on a tarp. I won't get too much into it, but it's there for you if you would like to learn more about disposal. I've also created a management calendar, which is basically just this presentation in one big calendar, so that you can reference it as a handout, something more accessible than flipping through a PowerPoint. And then lastly, I have linked here the Massachusetts invasive plant list. So state recognized invasive plants. There's also a prohibited plant list, which is worth looking at because, like I said before, Miscanthus is recently recognized as a state prohibited plant, and there's surely more to come. And with that, I will say thank you very much. And my contact information is listed here on this slide. And I would love to answer any questions. I know that there's only a few attendees, but if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Yes, so this webinar is being recorded. So we'll have a recording of this webinar up to view. I can send it to you. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions that we'll have. I just want to thank everyone again for joining and listening in. I know that it's not always the most enjoyable thing to listen to, invasive plant management, but it's important, and I hope that you've gained some knowledge and feel more prepared to go tackle some invasive plants on your own, or of course with the Invasive Plant Brigade. So with that, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night, and I look forward to being in contact if you have any more questions.